We'll begin by listing the 16 padarthas of Nyaya mentioned in the Nyaya Sutras, which together constitute the whole field. These are Praman, which is the means of valid knowledge, Prameya, objects of valid knowledge, Samshay, or doubt, Prayojana, which is purpose, Drishtant, which is example, Siddhant, which is an established conclusion, Avaya, which are the members of the syllogism, Tarka, which means hypothetical reasoning, Nirnay, or determination, Vad, or honest debate, Jalpa, or wrangling or debate aimed at mere victory, Vitand means only refuting without proposing a thesis of an own, Hetavabhas, which is fallacious reasoning, Chal, which is quibble or misinterpreting the opponent's words, Jati, which is the specious objection or sophistical rejoinders, and finally Nigrahasthana, which is the points of defeat, where one debate's position just breaks down. These cover epistemology, psychology of inquiry, and logic of debate theory. Now, let's look at Nyaya's soteriological frame, how salvation happens. Now, the way Nyaya Sutra states its soteriological thesis is upvarg. Now, what is upvarg? We have seen it earlier. Varg is salvation or liberation, which is achieved when the successively upwork is achieved when uh, successively some things disappear. What are these things? Mithya Gyan or false knowledge, dosh or defects, pravritti or wrong activity, janma or birth, and finally dukh. So once these disappear, once false knowledge disappears, once attachment disappears, once wrong activity disappears, once janm and finally dukh, these disappear in this order. False views, disappearance leads to the disappearance of mental defects, which leads to the disappearance of wrong actions, which leads to the disappearance of rebirth, and hence continuous suffering stops. So, the way to destroy false knowledge is through right knowledge. And only if you have right knowledge, then the effects vanish. The defects vanish, and then no karmic activity, no rebirth, and hence no suffering. So, Nyaya is deeply soteriological. It's not logic for logic's sake. Now we'll elaborate on the four pramanas or means of valid knowledge which Nyaya recognizes. So Nyaya recognizes four pramanas. First one being perception or pratyaksh. Pratyaksh is the determinate or non-contradicted cognition produced by contact of self-sense organ with its object, and it is uncomplicated by language and memory. Pratyaksh must be yatharth, that is, it must correspond to the object and not to an illusion. Then we have anuman or inference, which is knowledge of something unperceived from something perceived via a known invariable relation or vyapti. For example, smoke to fire. This relation is well known. It is vyap. This type of relation is referred to as vyapti. Nyaya later systematizes different kinds of such relations. Purvavat, which is from cause to effect, Sheshvat, which is from effects to cause, and Samanyato Drashta, which is from general concomitance. Then we have Upaman, which is knowing a new object through similarity with something already known. For instance, you have been told that a gavai, which is like a wild oxen, is like a cow. So a oxen is like a cow. Later in the forest, when you go, you see cow-like animal, and it comes to your mind that this must be a gavai. Why? Because you have been given a similarity-based thought that a gavai is like a cow. That similarity recognition is upaman. And then we have shabd or testimony. That is the statement of a reliable person. Apt. A reliable, who is a reliable person? A reliable person is one who knows and speaks truthfully. Vatsayan, Vatsayan says that a reliable person can be an Arya, a Rishi, and surprisingly, even a Mlech. So even a foreigner can be a reliable person, and anyone can be a testimony giver if qualified. And scriptural testimony is treated as a special case of Shab. What are the objects of knowledge? Prameya. What are prameya then? So Nyaya enumerates the objects of which we can have valid knowledge. The first is the Atman or self, Sharir, which is the body, Indriya, which are the senses, Earth or Vishay, which are the sense objects, Buddhi, which is the knowledge or understanding, Manas, which is the internal sense or mind, Pravritti, which is the endeavor and activity, Dosha, which are the defects, Pretya Bhava, which is the rebirth, Phala, which is fruits, Dukha, which is suffering, and Apvarga, which is liberation. Of these, we can have valid knowledge. So Nyaya's philosophical system builds or bases on these 12 prameyas and 4 pramanas. Quickly, we'll have some definitions of these prameya. Body. Body is that which supports the senses, and body is a seat of pleasure and pain caused by contact with sense objects. Senses are the modifications of the five elements: earth, water, ether, fire, and air, which are specially formed to grasp smell, taste, touch, sound, color, respectively. Uh, uh, respectively. So, earth is smell, water is taste, fire is color, air is touch, and ether is sound. And mind is an atomic internal sense which connects self with one sense organ at a time. And this can explain why we do not hear or see things at one time. Let's say why we don't hear and see simultaneously in the Nyaya's view. Pravritti. Pravritti is action in speech, body, or mind driven by desires or aversions. Dosha, which is attachment or rag, aversion or dvesh, delusion or moh, and such tendencies which produce karmically relevant behavior. Pain, which is dukkha. Pain is that which is essentially suffering for the self. Apvarg is the complete stoppage or cessation of pain. So it's a negative state, right? It simply means absence of pain, not the case that it is something of positive bliss, which was talked about in early Nyaya, but Nyaya as in how it evolved in the mature phase. And finally, it doesn't treat upward as something denoting positive bliss. It's just cessation of pain. Then we have some intermediate notions in reasoning. The first one being doubt or sanshaya. How does doubt arise? Doubt arises when there are conflicting marks that fit more than one possible description. For instance, you see a dim object from far. You see it has a tall vertical shape. It could be a man or it could be a post. So, what are the conditions for doubt then? That is memory for of more than one possible reference. Perception of a feature compatible with both. You can see that in example, the tall vertical shape was compatible with both man and the post, and an absence of a decisive sign for either. So here you don't have anything decisive for you to conclude that it's a man or it's a post. Then second after samshay comes prayojana or purpose. Prayojana is that for the sake of attaining or avoiding which a person undertakes some action. For instance, why do you perform a sacrifice? For that, your prayojan is your desire for heaven. Then we have drishtant in Hindi literature or in Sanskrit literature. You might have heard of this drishtant alankar. There also it means roughly the same thing, which is an illustrative example. Drishtant is a case where the relation between reason and conclusion is undisputed, and it must be known both to the debater and the opponent. For instance, both can agree that when there is smoke, there is fire. For example, in a kitchen, this is the most important thing. This is the drishtant. In a kitchen, where there is smoke, there is fire. Kitchen is one of those places where this relation stands true. In a kitchen is a drishtant. Then we have four kinds of established conclusions or siddhant. Nyaya distinguishes four categories of siddhant. First is the Sarvatantra Siddhant, which is shared by all schools. For instance, perception is a praman. Then we have Pratitantra Siddhant, which is accepted within one school but not others. Then we have Adhikaran Siddhant, which is accepted, which is established in a particular debate or context. Then we have Abhyupagama Siddhant, which is a thesis which you grant temporarily for the sake of argument because you want to draw out consequences. So these four siddhants. So let's go through it once more. Sarvatantra Siddhant, shared by all schools. Pratitantra Siddhant, one school but not others. Adhikaran Siddhant, established in a particular debate or context. And Abhyupagama Siddhant, a thesis granted temporarily for the sake of argument. This Abhyupagama Siddhant is something very relatable when you debate uh, in day-to-day life. Let's say you say that, okay, I'll accept what you say, but then what will happen if I accept? Of course, you have to avoid slippery slope fallacies and all that, but that is a nice way to beat the other person in debate. Although Nyaya doesn't encourage just beating others for debates. A genuine thirst for knowledge is what Nyaya prioritizes. Then we have five members of the Nyaya syllogism, which or aware is. So first one is pratigya. That is, for instance, the hill is fiery. This is the thesis. Hetu. What is the reason for this fairness of the hill? Because it has smoke. Then we have udaharan. Where there is smoke, there is fire, as in the kitchen. Then we have Upanaya, which is application. The hill has smoke of that sort. Some particular sort of smoke is there in that hill. Then finally we have Nigamana, that therefore this hill is fiery. We started with the hill is fiery because it has smoke. Then we moved on to where there is smoke, they, there is fire. For instance, in a kitchen, you said that that relation holds true. You have seen smoke, you have seen a fiery hill. From there, you move on to because it has smoke. Then you see, then you say that it might be having fire, as is true in the kitchen. And then you say the hill has smoke of that sort, and then finally you reach to the conclusion that the hill is fiery. Uh, initially when we said the hill is fiery, that was our thesis, and through the steps you concluded that. So Indian texts often only state hetu, but Nyaya artificially lays out all the 5 steps for clarity and for pedagogy. Then we have the fact that the first book gives the definitions of the other debate technical terms. Let's go through all of these. Tark is the hypothetical reasoning used to support correct view. How to do so? We do so by showing the absurdities in the alternatives. So it is a kind of reduction. Then we have Nirnay, which is firm determination after settling the doubts. Then we have Vad, which is fair debate aimed at truth. Then we have a Jalp, which is sadly what happens today. That is quibbling debate aiming at victory. Then we have Vitand, which is mere counterattack. The debater does not have a thesis of his or her own. What happens in political debates usually. Then we have Hetva Bhas, which is fallacious reasons again. Then we have Chala, which is distorting an opponent's statement or quibble. Then we have Jati, which is specious rejoining or sophistical general counter arguments. Then we have Nigrahasthan, which is an opponent's defeat points, where the opponent contradicts himself or herself, where the opponent fails to answer, etc. Then the second book of the Nyaya Sutra also defends the existence and validities of the Pramanas against the critics, especially the Buddhists. Two types of objections here are mentioned. First is against the possibility of doubt. Now, it is to be kept in mind that certain Buddhist thinkers had said that because everything is momentary, there is no stable object to be both this and that. Hence, there is no possibility for doubt to arise. To this, Nyaya replies that doubt arises when special differentiating characters are unclear. It does not require objects to be permanent, only that competing characterizations are possible. Then we also have points against the validity of perception. Now, this line of attack goes as follows. If the sense object contact and cognition occur in different moments, alternatively, if cognition is produced by some later moment, then sense contact cannot be a praman. Therefore, there are no means of right knowledge. Remember, to reiterate, this is as per the doctrine of Khanikatva. So, to this, Nyaya replies that if you deny all pramanas, it is impossible to claim any correct view. Even the view that all pramanas are invalid lacks any justification. Just as from a variety of sounds, we infer different musical instruments, from our cognition of objects, we infer that there are valid means by which objects are known. Further, Nyaya also says that the same things, senses or mind, that are instruments of knowledge, they can also become objects of knowledge. Therefore, the pramanas do not need any other pramanas to be known. So, pramanas are like a lamp, they reveal both themselves and their objects. Now, let's move on to perception. So, what is a refined definition? So, perception involves contact of soul with mind, and through mind with sense organ, and then with object. Without this multi level contact, perceptual cognition is Not possible. Then we have whole versus parts. We usually perceive only part of an object. For example, a front of a cow. But we judge a cow, that is, we judge the whole of a cow. From this, the conclusion Nyaya draws is that there are wholes or avayavin over and above mere set of parts. Now, we never see the ultimate indivisible parts. Hence, the existence of them can be known only through inference or anuman. Then we have plurality of possible causes. Now, the basic objection is if there can be many possible causes, how is it possible to infer one specific cause? The Nyaya answer to this is that each effect carries specific characteristics which are traceable to a particular cause. So it is still possible to identify the relevant cause by its unique marks. Then we have existence of time. So some opponents, for example, the Buddhists, denied time. Even we have seen Sankhya call time as Buddhi Nirmana. And Nyaya argues that we do not perceive past and future, this happened before or this will happen. Sorry, this is what the Buddhists said that we don't, there is no time. They give scant value to time. They don't regard time as well. But Sankhya Nyaya says that we do perceive. It's seen in the first instance as well about the Nyayiks upsetting the commonsensical notions about experience, particularly with respect to time. Without time as a real entity, such temporal judgments would be rendered impossible. Then the text says that the validity of Upaman and Vedas as testimony is also established. Now, besides these four pramanas, some schools like Mimamsa also accept more pramanas. So, why reject those more other pramanas? Four pramanas which, Mimamsa, let's say, especially accepts Arthapatti, which is presumption or implication. Then Atihya, which is tradition, Sambhava, which is knowing lesser from greater quantity, or Abhava, which is non perception. To this, Nyaya says that they are not really separate. Atihya and Arthapatti fall under Shabd or sometimes inference. Sambhav or knowing that if there is one of quantity of something, there must be eight, subunits of that thing. For example, one bushel of grain implies, 8 gallons. Uh, so that is just inference from quantitative relations. And abhav is also kind of inference, but it's not an independent praman. So the four are enough. That is perception, inference, analogy, and testimony. Now, Naics also have talked about the meaning of words. It distinguishes between the philosophy, Nyaya philosophy distinguishes between three semantic elements. First is the jati, which is the class universal. Example, the cowness. Second is the vyakti, which is the individual. That is this particular cow. Third is akriti or configuration, which is the specific form where this class is instantiated. Nyaya inclines to say that the primary meaning is class or jati because it is that which produces the notion of sameness. So it is jati which gives the notion of sameness. For example, if you see several cows and you cognitively you decide that they are all cows. So the word cow picks out the universal cowness, and individuals are then grasped as something which belong to that jati or which are bearers of that individual. Then we also have in the third book of the Nyaya Sutra proofs of the self's existence. Now, each sense has its own special object. Eye has its color, eye has color as its special object. Ear has sound, etc. And despite this diversity, we experience a single unified object. So, the sweetness, color, and smell of a mango, they are unified into one perception, and we say this is a mango. This unification requires a single knower. There is no enduring self, only scattered sensations belonging to separate senses. So that is through that merely we cannot experience the same object through multiple senses or recognize it again. There has to be something which is unifying all of that, right? Then we have some ethical and social consequences too if we deny the self. If there is no permanent self, then harming a body wouldn't truly be the same as harming the same person. So moral responsibility becomes hard to ground. Recognition also would be impossible without claiming that or without admitting that there is some enduring subject. Then this is against the idea that consciousness belongs to senses only. If consciousness belonged only to the senses, you could never recognize objects. For example, if you see a sour fruit, that reminds you of its taste too. So, taste belongs to tongue, vision to eye. There is some single subject which connects them, absence of which you wouldn't be able to do so. That unifying function, but it also is a fact that that unifying function cannot be credited to the mind alone either. If one denies self and elevates manas, one would have to posit or bring another instrument to coordinate even manas, and that would lead to infinite regress, which is a fallacy. So, if one denies self and says that these functions are done by manas, then who coordinates manas then? Right? So that would be a regress. So there is a distinct self-enduring, uh, there is a distinct and enduring self that underlies and coordinates all sense cognitions. It is the substrate of memory and recognition, and it is also the moral subject of sin and merit. So, Nyaya, for Nyaya, the self is eternal, is all pervasive, and is capable of knowledge, desire, aversion, and effort. And the self becomes manifest through contact with manas and senses. Then we have uh, uh, some talks on desire, pleasure, and pain in infants or past lives, which is again used as a proof for the existence of soul. So Nyaya is still arguing that there must be a soul because infants already show pleasure, pain, likes, and dislikes very early. So these cannot be explained by new experiences in this life alone because they have already appeared before any learning has occurred. So then what Nyaya infers from this is that these desires and aversions must be because of impressions from previous experiences in the past lives which were carried by a continuing self. Therefore, rebirth and continuity of self are affirmed. Then we have discussion on the bodies and senses being made up of the elements. Body is made of Prashiti, which is the earth element in Vaisheshik sense. All senses are material modifications of the five gross elements: eye, fire, ear, earth, nose, earth. Sorry, ear is ether, nose, earth, tongue water, skin air. And Nyaya refutes a very popular idea that skin alone is an organ of sensation. So, although skin is made of earth, but every sense organ, because it is made up of a special construction, it allows it to grasp its own distinctive quality. So, nose smell, tongue taste, eye color, skin touch, and ear sound. This aligns with Vaisheshik's mapping of element to sense object, but Nyaya stresses the organs are specialized modifications of those elements. Then we have a discussion on what Sankhya delineates as two, which are Buddhi versus Chit, and what Nyaya thinks of such delineation. So Sankhya says that there are two different things. Buddhi, which is the intellect and the product of Prakriti, and it is non-conscious, and another is Chit or Purush, which is pure consciousness, which is distinct and inactive. Now, sometimes Sankhya does blur between them and calls the cognitive aspect Buddhi Chit. So to this, Nyaya's response is that we don't experience two separate things in consciousness. For example, we don't experience a phenomenal buddhi and a non-phenomenal chit. We just experience one awareness. Sankhya explains cognition by arguing that the internal organ or antahkaran takes reflections of external objects like a crystal reflecting colored objects near it, and the Purush just witnesses these reflections. Nyaya's objection to this is that if reflections are momentary, you need a stable substrate which endures and remembers these reflections. Otherwise, how would continuity of experience happen? So, you cannot say that all are momentary reflections. There must be a real self which persists beyond the changing mental states. Therefore, Nyaya rejects the Sankhya mirror-like Antahkaran model, and it insists on one unitary conscious subject. Then we have a refutation of momentary world via transformation. Let's take the milk to curd analogy. Sankhya or Buddhists might say that milk doesn't really perish, just that its prior state transforms to curd and all is momentary flow. So this Nyaya says that the old milk is destroyed and a new entity originates. So there is genuinely production and destruction, not just changing modes of one underlying state. And Nyaya clarifies that contact of the manas and atman, that of the mind and self, occurs within the body. Knowledge belongs to the self and not to the senses or the object. So Atman is the possessor of knowledge. Even if the senses and objects are destroyed, that is, you destroy, something happens to your senses, or about which, the objects you can have valid knowledge about the premise. If you destroy them, still the knowledge or awareness remains. For example, in the memory, this reinforces that the self is a distinct locus of cognition which endures. So it is a distinct, enduring locus of cognition, and two recollections cannot be simultaneous because recollection is a mental act. Recollection needs Manas Atman contact. Since Manas is atomic and connects to only one thing at a time, recollections must occur sequentially. Then, desire and aversion also belong to soul, and they don't belong to body or mind because Manas is dependent. If Manas oneness had independent desires, self wouldn't be the true enjoyer or agent. And then we have 19 causes of recollection. Nyaya delineates the causes that stimulate recollection. What causes induce recollection? Attention or avadhan, context, repetition, signs or marks, similarity, association, relations, for instance, master servant, husband, wife, separation, occupation or employment, opposition, excess or deficiency, pleasure or pain. So these all, they stimulate recollection relate pertaining to the previous associations. So there are 19 such factors. Philosophically, Nyaya tries to give us an early cognitive psychology that memory arises when there are associative links, plus there is an element of attention. Nyaya emphasizes knowledge doesn't belong to body, that body is just matter. Then it turns to adrist, which is the unseen merit. So, how does the production of the body happen? It happens due to adrist. Upvarg or liberation, that happens when mind is permanently separated from self through destruction of karma. And because when karma is destroyed, adrist also destroys. So Nyaya merges into psychology with its appeal to the karmic metaphysics. Then, in the book 4, while discussing the dosha or defects, Nyaya says that moh, ignorance or confusion, is the root of all defects like attachment and aversion of raga and dvesh. This is a very classic soteriological statement that if you remove ignorance, the defects vanish and then liberation. So, this is in opposition to the Buddhist idea that in effect can be produced by destruction alone, because destruction is just one stage in change, it is not the whole causal story. Now, Nyaya is clearly theistic. The text introduces Nyaya's theism clearly that Ishvara or God is the cause of production of fruits of actions performed by people. But human effort is also needed because God doesn't assign fruits in an arbitrary fashion. God supervises the karmic order. So this gives Nyaya a somewhat distinct flavor compared to non-theistic Vaishesika and Mimamsa. So Nyaya also refutes a doctrine of ahetuka or no cause. And those who say that things appear without cause are wrong because we constantly see production and destruction governed by regularity. So ahetuka is no cause, sort of like things have no causes. But this is in opposition to the regular commonsensical view. Then Nyaya also refutes the nihilist Buddhists or Shunyavadins and relation only theories. Now, several Buddhist positions have been targeted, the first being Shunyavad. Shunyavad is the extreme emptiness view that things are only relations, things are not real entities. And other Buddhist position which has been attacked is some the stance that there are only qualities or only parts and there are no substances or wholes. This Nyaya's reply is if everything is only relational or qualitative, you cannot explain. How would you explain that the substrate? How would you explain the substrate where the qualities inhere? Or how parts compose persisting wholes. So these doctrines are refuted And Nyaya insists on independent substances are not wholes. Then it has been said that fruits of karma are like tree fruits. So there is a time gap between action and fruition, which is the effect. So there is a time gap between cause and effect. Karmic fruits, it takes some time for karmic fruits to ripen. It doesn't happen instantly. Even if there is pleasure in life, birth is suffering because amidst all the pleasures, he is tormented by many sorrows. So at this point, at this position, I seems to align with Sankhya, which also said that Sankhya Yoga, which also said that many sorrows, even if you're let's say enjoying an ice cream, but the ice cream will get finished soon. I mean that will bring sorrow. In deep sleep, there is no sorrow. Why? Because mind is not active. Similarly, in upvarg salvation, there is no clash or friction because all efforts or pravrittis stop forever in upvarg. So, Nyaya's liberation is a permanent deep sleep. It is like absence of pain. It is not a positive, blissful state. So, Nyaya besides all of these, that Nyaya gives shorter discussions on ahankar, which is egoism, the true causes of its dosh, nature of whole part relation, and the anu, which are indivisible. These were already touched in the Vaishesika. Then we have uh, the Vigyanvad Buddhism and Yoga. So the text also discusses the Vigyanvad Buddhists who claim that there is nothing apart from the ideas, Vigyan, there is no external matter. Nyaya argues that these views can't account for public shared objects or when two or more people, let's say they jointly agree on something. How would Vigyanvadis explain this, that there are nothing apart from ideas? Then yoga is also mentioned as a discipline leading to right knowledge. How does it happen? It happens through calming of the mind, sharpening of concentration, and overcoming the defects. And the last book of Nyaya Sutra focuses on cataloging the Vigrah sthans, which are the refutations, and the jatis, which are the futilities. So basically, it catalogs the debate tricks and the fallacious rejoinders. And this might be a later addition, at least Dr. Surendranath Dasgupta agrees. So, because it is very specialized and it suits a period where formal debate had become very, very technical.